Welcome to gaLtalk, a new show for women with an emphasis on discussing the cares and concerns of life from the perspective of women of color. gaLtalk is not just talk. GAL is an acronym for Get a Life. That's life with a capital L, as in life in Jesus. We're not just here to talk, but to share with you wisdom you can trust. Now, what we will say will sound like it's countercultural at times, because it is. God's wisdom is often opposite of what we want to do. It's the hard thing to do a lot of times, but it's the thing that will bring us peace and contentment that other advice will not give us. Join us on this countercultural journey.
Hello, Galaxy. Happy Women's History Month. Today, that's our focus for the episode. We are celebrating. Fun fact, the first Women's History Month actually took place in 1909, which is a crazy thought, because you would think that Women's History Month is something that came about recently, but it's actually a pretty old holiday. And did you know that every year they pick out a specific theme for Women's History Month? Like this year, we're celebrating women who heal. I guess the organizers of the movement really wanted to focus on our frontline workers just because of everything with the ongoing pandemic. But anyways, I digress. Today, our very special guest is Irrayna. Irrayna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I work with GAL, and we just thought it would be a really good idea for us to have a discussion about inspirational women. So that's it. But I was listening to your fun fact, and it's amazing. 1909. Is there like a National Men's Day month or something?
I don't know, and if there is, I've never heard of one.
Yeah, me either. But so it just seems like so long ago. Like you say, it seems like it would be something recent because with the hashtag Me Too and so on and so forth. But like way back in 1909, you said they were like, we need to recognize women. So it's evidently been an ongoing kind of need to recognize just the value of women.
Mm-hmm. I didn't have a chance to look into the history behind it, but I think that it probably has something to do with the whole women's suffrage movement, just because I know that the sorority that my family members are all in, they did a march in 1913. So if you go by that timeline, like it all kind of fits together.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, we will start with our first question. Irrayna, what women in your life that you personally know inspire you the most?
Well, let's see. I'm gonna go with my mom and my grandmother. I mean, I can go further out than that, but if I had to start with, the ones who have affected my life the most, my mom, because I know as I was growing up, I was probably like, I was a good child, I was a good child, but, everybody has their moments where, you won't take no for an answer. And I just remember I wanted to go out of town for college, and my family didn't necessarily have the means to do it. I remember, and so I ended up going to Howard. My mom let me go. But I remember one time I was in my freshman year, I got a letter from my mom, and they would send me money because I wasn't working or anything. And it was a little note in there. She said, "This is all we have right now." She said, "And don't worry if you call and the phone is off. Don't worry, we're fine." And and I don't know if at the time, because I still have like all the letters that she wrote, and I think I had seen that after the fact, going back. I don't think in the moment it hit me, the sacrifice my family was making. But looking, back, you think about the things that the people in your life, in this case, my mom and my dad, the sacrifice that they made so that there's some things that you could do that, if you had known what they were going through, I guess as an adult, you might not have asked them to make that sacrifice, but they did it willingly, And then my grandmother, she's the one, it's just funny because I was just on the phone with my uncle the other day. He just called to say hello. And my grandma came up, and she's the one that when, the rubber hit the road, like life got tough. Like the song I like says, "When my sin caught up with me."
Yes.
She was the one that came to mind, because every time I visit my grandmother, she was always, talking about Jesus and watching her little, programs, her little, religious programs on TV and stuff like that. And so when that day came, and life just seemed bigger than I could handle. I was like, I need something. And my grandmother came to mind, and her just asking me about if I had been to church. And I was like, Jesus. And I was like, that's what I need. I need God. She was the one, because of the consistency, I think, of her life and her walk with the Lord. She's the one that came to my mind. And so, yeah, those two women. Now, there are other women in terms of, who have contributed, but those two stand out a lot. What about you?
I definitely have to agree. I know it's cliche, but I would not be the woman that I am if it were not for my mom, and before her, my grandmother, because my mom wouldn't be who she is. There are a lot of things that my grandma instilled in my mom, and then later my sister and I and my cousins, that are just invaluable. And one thing my parents always taught me is that you stand on the shoulder of giants. And as I got older, I really got a chance to see like what they meant when I put things into perspective. So not to brag or anything like that, but I really admire my grandma, because she did some things that I could not have done, especially like in the time period that these things were done. So she actually went to college and has a degree. So I'm a third generation college student. And that is a blessing all in itself, because people my age are still first generation college students. So I recognize that. But when you put into perspective, like the time period that she was going to college, African Americans were not supposed to be there. Like those spaces were not for us, let alone like she did it at a predominantly white institution. Like she did not go to an HBCU. So that's even more crazy. Like her and my grandfather and my grandfather's siblings were really trailblazers. And so I actually look up to my Aunt Joan too, because she was the first African-American cheerleader at Wichita State. And I know that is not something that I could do. Like I get nervous in spaces in 2022 where I am the only Black person. So imagine you were doing it in the 60s.
Right.
So I really admire her and her strength and her perseverance and like her value of education. Those are all things that she instilled in my sister and my cousins and my mom and my aunts. And so it's just kind of carried down through the line. Another thing that has kind of just carried down is her faith. And so that's something that we all gained from her. Like she's a very old school grandma. Was like, when you come to visit, we are waking up, we're going to church, like you're going to get dressed. And that went hand in hand with how things were at home. But I know that my mom wouldn't be who she is if it wasn't because of my grandma and all of her prayers. And so I am grateful for that. I also admire my grandma's confidence. That is something that I did not have growing up. I was chubby. I'm not skinny by any means now, but back then I was a little chunky. My hair could not be tamed. As you can see, it's not tamed right now. So imagine it as a child. And I
love untamed hair, and you are a fine woman. So go ahead.
Thank you. And I had these little like Coke bottle Harry Potter type glasses because I have terrible eyesight. Right now I have on contacts, so you can't see how bad it is. But I just had such low self-esteem, and I was getting bullied. And if it weren't for my grandma, I wouldn't have the confidence that I have today, because no matter what, she wanted us to remember, like, the world isn't going to tell you you're beautiful. The world shouldn't, like, you shouldn't be looking for their, what's the word I'm looking for? You shouldn't be looking for them to affirm that you're beautiful. Like it has to start in here. So she would always make us look in the mirror, like my mom and my aunts and even me and my cousins, and we would have to look in the mirror and we would have to say like, I am beautiful, like Jesus loves me, I was created in his image, and just go down the line with all those affirmations. And I still say those today. Like when I'm feeling a little bit down, like I go stand in the mirror and I'm like, okay, I am God's child. Like, my name is Angelica. I am beautiful. Like I can do this. I can get through this. And so I'd have to say she is one of the people who inspires me the most.
But that's amazing, because I think your grandmother, given the time that she came up, right, like you said, and being sometimes a lot of times the minority in the group, you can imagine that some of the self-talk she had to encourage herself with to get through some of the things that she had to go through. And I just find we're talking about women, but just I think that era of like you said, the giants, the shoulders that we stood on, a lot of stuff we don't have to endure. And I think at some point when we talk to people who have had to endure it, it's hard for us to imagine just kind of what they endured. And so sometimes there's that disconnect and that lack of appreciation for what they actually went through. So when we watch the movies like the like 42, you know, with the baseball player and stuff, I know it's a guy, but you know, it's one of those things where you start to see, you know, somebody have to push through a situation in order to make room for, you know, those people that came after him. And so in that way, I see in your grandmother that kind of this, you know, something she walked through and she knew you needed and she gave you a tool. But it was my dad. It was in that era of the Black is beautiful thing, you know, and he would, you know, just kind of, I guess in his own way, encourage his kids, you know, and that.
I love that.
Yeah,
just like you said, they endured it and then they gave us all the tools that we need. So the next question is, we just talked about these women that inspire us, but how do we show them appreciation?
So I had one thought in mind, but the one that jumped in my mind, and I'll get back to the other one, is we were just talking about like standing on their shoulders. And I think that one way to show appreciation is to, you know, for the path that they paved, to actually walk it faithfully. You know what I mean? Like make it so that the work that they did wasn't for nothing. You know, like,
not in vain.
Like we actually take advantage of the hard work that they did. You know, like it's like if somebody else cried tears for you, you don't want to have to go and re-cry tears. You know, take advantage of the lessons that they learned and the wisdom that they're sharing, and actually make them proud. You know, make them live in a way that they feel like what they did wasn't for anything either, you know, like, so. But then another thing is I was listening to a program a long time ago, and it was talking about showing appreciation to people that you love and not waiting until they die to, you know, like
their flowers while they're here.
Yeah. And so I remember, excuse me, I'm sorry, my mom, she's passed away. But I remember we would have these family reunions, and I know my cousins, my aunts, and them, they were my relatives were like, why is she always writing poems to her mom? I'm like, I would write her poems, and I would, you know, kind of, you know, tell them and just love on her and stuff, because I took what I heard very seriously. You know, I was just like, I want to let her know, because, you know, once you grow up enough sometimes to know the sacrifices that people have made, and I just wanted to like make it known, this person did this person loved me well, and I love her well, and I just wanted to show that appreciation, you know, for her. So yeah,
that's a good answer, because that was my answer, was to give them their flowers while they're still here. But I think another way that I kind of show them appreciation, it ties back into last month's episode, really trying to use their love language when I'm showing them appreciation. So like my grandma's really big on words. She loves to read. She writes a little. So like using words of affirmation for her and just telling her how much she means to me works. But I really think that one of my mom's love languages, when I need to show her appreciation, is receiving gifts. So like she is the one who like, give me flowers, give me a nice card, and honestly, it's the least I can do. If that's what makes them feel special, then that's what I'm going to do to show them how much they mean to me.
Definitely.
Which women in the Bible have inspired you the most?
Okay. Oh, you know, well, inspired me. There are lots of good women who inspire me, but I was looking this one up because she stood out to me, and I'm just going to tell you who she is. So her name is Jael, right? And it's in Judges. And you know, there's always a war going on back in the day. And there was an army general from the opposition. His name was Sisera, and he was running from the Israelite army. And she invited him into her tent. They were kind of like, her tribe was kind of like, her group was kind of little bit neutral, but leaned, towards the Israelites. But anyway, so I guess he thought he was in friendly territory. So she invited him into the tent, and she's like, "Let me give you something warm to drink." And he laid down. She said, "Get some rest or whatever." And then she took a tent peg and drilled it through his temple. And I know this sounds bad, but I think the reason she stood out was because there was this sometimes, people envision Christians as really like, and even our God as like a love every, and we do, we love, but there's a part of us that God has that's a warrior almost, because we have to be bold enough to stand our ground. And I guess she stood out. And one of the things is, in this whole story, there was the person who was over the Israelite army at the time. He just didn't step up the way he was supposed to. And the prophetess Deborah said that, if he did step up, because he didn't step up, a woman was going to take the credit for what he did. And that's what Jael did. I'm sorry, she was going to take the credit for the win of the battle. And that's what Jael did. That was the place she stepped into. But I just, she stood out because that's not an easy, to me, it's not an easy thing to do. What she do. For me, I'm like, I don't think I could do that. But, if you have, like, today in our world, was going on over in Europe, you have this battle going on and you have this person terrorizing everybody. And, she had the opportunity to end it. That's what she did. And I don't know. Yeah. And I don't know if I'm brave enough to do something like that, but I want to be. And I don't mean necessarily in just the physical sense of, drilling a tent peg through somebody's temple, but I want to be strong enough as a Christian and a woman to do tough things. That's what I mean, to do things that are necessary. And so, I mean, there's always the other ones like Mary, who I think sometimes if you're not Catholic, you're kind of hesitant to talk about, Mary, but God chose her. I mean, for whatever reason, Mary was chosen by God because there's something in her character, something, whatever it was,
that he saw.
He saw something in Mary. And so in that way, you're like, ooh, is there it's one of those, I don't necessarily need to be like Mary or, but I want God to see something good in my character as well, where, of course, we're not going to have any more virgin births, but but you know what I mean? It's like one of those things that would be nice if God were to say, "Oh, your character is really, good. You're like
I can use you."
Yeah. So things like that. And there's always the Proverb 31 woman, the superwoman that none of us can.
That's the bar we all strive for.
Yeah. We drive ourselves crazy trying to reach, right?
Yes.
So, but yeah, I mean, so there, that's just kind of my thought on the women in the Bible that have.
Yeah, like you said, there are so many, because I was going over the questions, I was really struggling to figure out. I was like, okay, is there just one? And I was like, I feel like I could just go through the list and name all of them, because they all bring something that you can take from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I really narrowed it down. And so the first one that I went with is Hannah. And I'm just really looking to her in the season of life that I'm in, because there's a lot of prayers that God has said he's going to answer. It's just it seems like it's taking forever. And so she knew she was going to have a son, and she held God at his word, and she never ceased in her prayer and her faithfulness to him. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm trying to take from, because it seems like I'm not going to get these things, but if God promised it, he's never going to turn his word back to you void. Mm-hmm. So it's going to come. as well as like when I finally get those things, I need to remember to be like Hannah, because she turned it back over to God. And I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with, because when you finally get something, you want to hold on to it and you're like, no, it's mine now. But it really doesn't belong to us.
Right.
And so I think that is something that is just so amazing, because I don't know if I would have been able to let go like she did.
Yeah. Yeah,
See?
that's true. Because I'm actually reading, I'm in First Samuel, because we're doing a study on the life of David. So I just backed it up to the beginning of the book. So I just, went through this story, and that thought crossed my mind also. And I was like, well, at least maybe she got to see him once a year, when they went up for the sacrifice. But yeah, you're right. She turned Samuel over. And he was brought up in the priesthood away from his mom, I think he was probably about what, like they used to wean kids at maybe 5 at that point when she turned him over. I think they can go as old as 5. Maybe. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, that's still your first baby. And God gave her more kids, but like you said, that's a hard thing to do, and making sure we hold things loose enough so that God can do whatever he needs to do with them, and I think that was one of like Abraham's, issues with Isaac, right? When God had him go through his exercise to make sure that only God was in that part of his heart and Abraham's heart, and that his son wasn't an idol, But yeah, I agree with you, Hannah. Definitely. And then she, okay, so then we get to another part of the Bible we don't even talk about today, but she had this rival wife.
Yes.
Who was nagging her. And in that way, I think, while we're saying she had this wife, her husband had a second wife and she had kids and Hannah didn't have kids. And I think in that way, we're looking at our culture, there's always that what somebody else has, that Facebook kind of, or Twitter, Snapchat, like life that you see that somebody else has, and it kind of sometimes. Why
can't my life be like that? Why isn't my job like that? Why am I not making that amount of money? Why don't I have that car or that boyfriend?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of a little bit of what she was going through too. But like you said, God, God made her a promise. God told her what was going to happen, and she hung in there. But that is a tough spot to be in when other people have, and sometimes we don't have.
But she still handled it with grace.
Yeah.
So a lot of the women that we've talked about thus far have had a lot or one thing in common. They've all had a relationship with Jesus, or like they have a strong faith background. But is there any woman that you can think of that you are inspired by that doesn't necessarily have that relationship with God?
I can say yes. I don't necessarily have a single woman, but I do find that when you can watch a story or you see women who are like at the top of their game, or in their industry, because it's inspiring when you see people who are doing things well and with excellence, you know what I mean? And so, and when they reach their goals in their joy, they're happy. It's kind of like it kind of bleeds over. You're happy for them, So in that way, I can say, yeah, I can definitely see where I admire women who are at the top of their game or are excellent in that way. And it inspires me to, in my area of life, whatever I'm, to just try to to be the best that I can be at where I am. So that's all. Yeah. What about you?
This was a really hard question, because I was going through all these women who inspire me, and I was like, is there, like, have I come across one? And so I don't know. I even talked about this with Allison. Allison's my sister, everyone. And so I was like, yeah, Allison, can you think of anyone? And she was like, I don't know if you necessarily have any women who don't have relationships with Christ, but you do have some women who like aren't necessarily like the most outspoken about them, or it like leaves you room to kind of like guess and inference. So one of the examples she gave was Michelle Obama. You don't hear a lot about her Christian background. Like everyone knows that she kind of grew up in church, and you see pictures of them going to the church across the street from the White House. But in terms of like her relationship with Christ, you don't know where she is in it. And so there's a good chance that she might not even really be a practicing Christian, as they call them now. And so I think that that is probably one of the best examples I can give, is I'm inspired by Michelle Obama. I think that she has a great story, and I think that it's very relatable to a lot of women. And so I've just always kind of been inspired by her. I think the other thing is her strength when she tells the story of her father and like losing him and him dealing with his illness inspired me when I had to walk through all of that with my father. It was one of the first things that kind of came to mind as I was grieving, just remembering like when Michelle Obama became first lady, it was a big deal. Everybody knows that. But I had bought like this little book on her life. And so one of the chapters, it talks about her, you know, watching her dad lose his independence and dealing with his MS. And so there were a lot of parallels just because I lost my dad to ALS. And so it shares her grief. And then in her autobiography that she later wrote, that came out a couple of years ago, Becoming, she, you know, talks about her having to grieve her father and like all the things that he inspired her and just having to be strong in the midst of all of that. And so that was really inspiring to me. It was something that helped me get through it.
That's good. And I do think that in a way, because she has a very unique position, you know, as the first like African-American first lady, there's just, I think something about her, and it's in, but she also has like her own, in her own right, you know, this person that she is. And so
because people forget that she was Barack's boss.
Well, see, but I just know she in herself, she had her own, you know, career, and she's smart and intelligent, and so I can definitely see that.
That, and then I think another thing that's inspiring about her is she has a lot of grace, and she just handles things with such grace, because like I said about my grandmother, I don't think that I could have been in her position, because, you know, being the president's wife, especially the first African-American president's wife, there was a lot that came with it, and like blazing that path. And even when all the media and stuff like that, like they always come after anybody who's in the White House, but these attacks that they were giving her were really, really specific. Like when they compared her to a gorilla and things like that, I could not do it, you know, like I would have been on Twitter responding back to them. I do not look like a gorilla. How dare you say that? That's racist. But she just like, you know, lets it go and lets it all slide off, and you never hear of her respond. Okay. I think you kind of touched on this when you were answering the question, but is there a difference between the way godly women and other women inspire you?
Oh yeah, I think I did touch on that, huh? Like, so I think in the ways that they inspire me, like I said, in general, there's this idea for me that, you know, excellence is good, but it's not necessarily the same as godly wisdom. It doesn't mean that I'm gonna necessarily feel like that person could speak into my life the same way a godly person. Like they clearly, you know, if they're a doctor and they have this unique method of healing, that they can speak to that. But in terms of wisdom and just worldview and kind of, you know, how to conduct myself morally or something like that, then, you know, that line that's drawn. It doesn't mean that woman, she doesn't have the same, I mean, she may have some of the same principles, but definitely from a godly woman with the Spirit of God, there's something that additional she has, you know, that kind of inside track. She, you know, she just gets that wisdom from the Holy Spirit that we can't find in the world. And so in that way, I would say there's that difference. So, yeah.
I think you kind of touched on it, but like you said, like it's kind of like two different worlds. And so like the markers that I have for myself as a Christian woman aren't necessarily like the markers that she would use for success. Like ultimately in the end, I want to do whatever God said to do, but in their mind it might be like, oh, I want to reach like the top of my career and da 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 da, and I have to have like this car, and like these are the things that I'm going to use to mark my success. And that's not necessarily what it looks like from a Christian point of view.
Right.
But those are still good goals to have. Like there's still goals you can have. You can say like, oh, I want to advance in my career, but at the end of the day, like it's different.
Yeah, I agree. You said it very well. Very well. So.
Well, those were all the questions that I had for you.
Oh, thank you. I had a really good time. Very lively discussion.
Yes, and it was so great just to hear you talk about your mom and your grandma. Okay, that is the end of our episode.